Scrutiny panel here in the chamber. This is being streamed live, so hopefully there are some people out there watching us. I'll start by just asking members of the panel to introduce themselves. So I'm Councillor John Taylor, and I'm chairing this committee today.
Councillor Harry McCarthy from Colne Valley Ward.
Tyler Hawkins, Dalton Ward.
Alex Lucas, Shrewsbury East Ward.
Please.
Councillor Liz Mays, just observing. Thank you.
I'll ask officers if you will introduce yourselves as you present your agenda items. Paul, if you want to.
Sure. Councillor Paul Davis, Cabinet Member for Corporate, and here as a observer as well.
Right. Now then, if we can start with membership of the committee. Have we had any apologies?
We've had apologies from Councillor Lawson, Gary Kitchen and Christina Parks.
And I believe Councillor Steve Hall is going to join us, but he has a meeting prior to this, so he may be a little bit late. Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting. Have members had an opportunity to have a look at the minutes? Are we content to approve the minutes? Thank you very much. Interest. Does anybody have any interest that they wish to declare on any of the agenda items? If it does become apparent during the meeting that you do have an interest, there is a form attached if you could complete it at the end of the meeting and hand them to Jenny. Admission of the public?
Yes, all agenda items are public.
Okay, so we'll be taking the matters in public. Have we had any deputations or petitions?
None.
Any public questions? No public present?
Public questions.
Okay. That swiftly moves on to item 7, which is our communications strategy. I guess, Marcus, you're going to be starting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce myself, I'm Marcus Bowell. I'm Head of Strategic Communications for the Council. I'll dive straight into my presentation if that's okay with you. I hope you've received it for the weekend. I'll be going through those slides. There's more slides than I intend to speak for. I hope that's of some comfort to members. But last time I was here in the autumn, I set out our communications strategy, and we talked quite a lot about the principles behind it. And I just want to take the panel through the kind of implementation that we've managed to achieve since the autumn. I'll just kick off quickly with a brief recap of what we mean by strategic communications, because the primary objective behind the approach is to develop the service into a strategic operation, and that means being more proactive. It means using brand in a more disciplined way. It's about, rather than broadcasting, trying to reach people via the channels that they actually use, and trying to elicit engagement with people rather than just imparting information or ordering people to do things. So that's the objective of the strategy. We said we would implement it in 3 ways, because communications is always about 3 things, and the strategy's no different. So the first way we said we would implement was by trying to create narrative. So narrative is a much used word, but not necessarily that well understood. It's about storytelling. It's about being proactive. It's about being consistent. It's about tying together different activities into a single story, which makes it more understandable for your audience. And we've gone about establishing narrative in 2 different ways. The first way is by developing our business plan, and our business plan allows us to select our primary campaigns, so those things that we're really going to focus on, those things that we're going to use our resources for, and the issues and the activity that we're going to be proactive about and try and tell a story. And the stories are under those headings of growth, inclusion, cleaner, greener, excellence, leadership, and the internal employer of choice theme. I've given a rundown there of the major campaigns that we are running at the moment, or we hope to run in the future. In the new municipal year, we will update that in line with the council's corporate planning and its priorities. So we've been running the business plan, but the other aspect of creating narrative is through taking a campaigns approach. And what I was hoping to do this morning was take the panel through what a campaign actually means. It's all very well talking about a campaigning approach, but what does that mean in practice? And I picked out just one current campaign that's perhaps of interest to members, and that's the voter ID campaign. So the local elections this year, for the first time, will require voters to produce ID at the polling station. That's quite a big change, and it's the sort of change that people need to know about. And the way we approach this campaign is to use broadly what's known in the industry as an OASIS campaigning framework, which sounds more complicated than perhaps it is. It really is mainly about setting objectives, thinking about your audience, thinking through your messaging. You're not just broadcasting, you need to think through the messages people might actually respond to, and it's about evaluating your success as well. So we've got some very simple objectives for the campaign. Firstly, to make people aware that they need to have ID to vote. We want to drive people to the alternative ways of being able to vote with the certificate process. But we also want to make sure people are aware of the elections, and generally speaking, which we would do every year, but this year there's an extra dimension to that. So they're the simple objectives. What we've done here with the using our sort of new campaigning approach is we've created a brand. So we could send out a whole series of messages saying, remember your ID. We could send emails, social media messages, and that kind of thing. But we've thought about making sure all that different messaging looks similar, it's repetitive, people might see it, remember it, it's quite bold, but in the circumstances, also I hope quite neutral politically. We've spent a lot of time, and we do spend a lot of time thinking about colour schemes and those sorts of things to make sure this is purely an administrative campaign. So we've thought about our messaging and our audiences and who might need to hear the messaging more than others, and what to do with it. Likewise, just to set out the brand, as you can see, those are all the different sort of places you're going to see the messaging, and it all ties together and feels like a coherent campaign, so that each of the messages kind of crosses over with the others into a kind of single, under a single purpose. So we spent a lot of time thinking about the brand and creating it ourselves. And channels. We've gone through these are the usual channels, really. So through social media and the various other channels that we use. But one of the things that the panel raised last time I was here was to look at how we used outdoor media, how we used signage, those kind of things out in the community, because not everyone's online, not everybody follows the press, that sort of thing. So we've had a focus on the things beyond digital, and we've got some ad vans, for example, driving around various locations at the moment. We've taken out some advertising, using our own assets and estate to put the messages out there. We've got some bus backs moving around Kirklees, all using the same branding, all with the quite simple messaging for people to try and direct them to either get a certificate or to remember. And this will wind up over the next few weeks, because you don't necessarily want people the call to action to happen too far in advance, so they've forgotten before it's time to actually action it. And we're looking at our evaluation as well. There's an ad van driving around, just to prove that's not computer generated. That's a real van in a real Kirklees location. So we're looking at evaluating afterwards. So the key test will be how many people were turned away from voting because they weren't aware of the new rules. And we'll also have a look at, all things being equal, what turnout looks like in Kirklees. We've had several hundred applications, colleagues tell me, for the certificates. I think nationally there are fewer applications have been made than the Electoral Commission anticipated, so there's all the more reason for this campaign to run and ramp up over the next few weeks. So that's how the campaign approach works, that's how it ties together. We'll take the learning away from it to help with planning new campaigns, and we'll assess how each of the channels delivered and put that into our knowledge bank before we set out on new campaigns. I'll move on now to the second pillar, as I called it, of the strategic communications plan, and that's looking at our channels and our audiences and understanding that we need a diversity of channels because people in Kirklees don't exist primarily on Facebook or Twitter or read the local newspaper or even follow the BBC. So we have to try and find people where they are. And I've just highlighted 3 of the newish channels that we've been exploring over the past few months. And the top one is probably the most significant one. And there's an app called Nextdoor, which is a hyperlocal app, which is designed pretty much on a ward basis, is the area it covers. And there's about 50,000 people in Kirklees at the moment who have signed up to the Nextdoor app. And it's very useful for things like road closures or very localised action, probably good for councillors to be involved in, for example. It's got a growing audience and we're trying to tap into it. It's also free, which is another benefit of it. And I've got some evaluation data from Nextdoor. We're also looking at Pinterest, which is a social media platform that's been around for a while, but we think offers some potential for certain campaigns. And I'm thinking in particular, one of the things that you raised last time, Chair, was woven, for example. Pinterest is about craft, aesthetics, those kind of things. And that's got quite a big Kirklees following, which is something that we could explore as well. And I think it's the content is sometimes quite counterintuitive in that it's got a very young audience interested in issues like textiles, for example, that traditionally would be focused at a different group. It gives us some ideas on how to connect with a different kind of audience. Likewise, we've used Spotify. We are poised to use Snapchat as well. We've run some Spotify advertising for public health, some public health campaigns, and we're awaiting the feedback on that. So that's, if people have smart speakers, for example, they get an advert from us, and it's localised depending on where you are. So we'll be analysing all of that data, but it's just, those are 3 of the ways we're exploring new channels. I've just, there's a couple of examples there. So the left-hand example is just where one of the council's environmental teams cleared up an alley or a ginnel, something along those lines, which we were able to put out just to the local area because on the other side of Kirklees you might not be particularly interested in that, but this allowed us to focus in on that area, and it's a good place for local news to go. Likewise, Pinterest, we've got, there are some interesting trends that we can find from Pinterest, and I think it will work really well for certain campaigns. I think there's definitely an audience there. I'll come back to the data in a bit because the third pillar of our strategy has been about evaluation, and we have put together some reporting data now. We've got some KPIs about how our audiences are growing, and they do tend to grow varying rates. And the data is giving us much better insight into who our audiences are, what they like, and where they're getting their information from. And my final slide was just a very broad, it's not my, this is my penultimate slide, sorry. There's some interesting data we've picked up from our KPIs. On the right there is how many people are on the Nextdoor app per ward, which is higher than I thought it would be. So there's well over 1,000 in every single ward in Kirklees, and there's a lot of sharing goes on from that app. We've also picked up challenges for us. So Huddersfield dominates disproportionately to its population, probably our channels at the moment. It looks like that we've got some development work to do with other local centres on the way that we tag, describe, and the kind of content we put out. Facebook, just looking at the age profile, it's not quite true that everybody on Facebook is over 50. That's not the Kirklees audience. There's the 35 to 44 age group is our biggest audience. It's primarily women follow us on Facebook almost 2 to 1, which is an interesting statistic that tells us a little bit about how we can build audiences. And finally, we're benchmarking against comparator authorities and generally other authorities. These are the four main channels on social media. So they don't tell us everything, but this is simply the percentage, the number of followers as a percentage of our population compared to other authorities. You can see we're right in the middle. Right in the middle there. It's an aggregation of all three platforms, but we are ahead of some of the authorities that we are most like. You'll see at the end, the cities are up there, and they have Twitter followings that probably don't suggest engagement, really, because Twitter isn't really a platform about engagement. Not that you can find any data about Twitter since the new owner came in. They've shut the analytics down. I don't know why. I think it's because people were looking at his analytics. But the Twitter is disproportionately relied upon by the cities. I think people follow them as a city rather than as a local authority. But as you can see, we've got that's pointed to some development work that we can do. I think the most interesting point for me of that those graphs is Derbyshire Dales, who are all over Facebook. They have a very effective Facebook engagement and followership. And my initial instinct was that was a facet of their tourism industry perhaps there, and it was not necessarily related to the local authority. Having looked into it, it's not really about tourism. The council just does a really good job on Facebook in getting engagement and following from local people. So they're somewhere for us to learn from, certainly. Other than that, it just gives us a bit of an incentive. I do think it's helpful and healthy for us to look at our comparator authorities and attempt to outperform them. And this is the sort of the basic numbers that can help us do that. So those are the three pillars and how we've been trying to implement them. I'm happy to take any questions from the panel.
Thanks, Marcus. I'll let members come in first if they want to ask any questions. Councillor Lukic.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Marcus. I've actually got quite a few questions about comms generally and campaigns and other bits about comms, so I can kind of go one at a time, I suppose. But I just want to say some positives first, I suppose. I think the voter ID campaign is well planned and designed. I think it's very strong visually, and definitely catches the eye, clear message, exactly what we'd want, really. So we want to make sure that message is out there as much as possible. So really good job on that one so far. Just thinking about getting that information everywhere it needs to be, the couple of questions about our own digital channels being used for this voter ID campaign. So when I do like an internet search for Kirklees voter ID, the main result that actually comes up first takes us to the register to vote page on the Kirklees website. And it struck me that there's no mention of voter ID on the register to vote page, even though I know if you go through the home page of the website, you'll quickly run into those messages. But if there's, say, new residents or people moving who are registering to vote and going through the council website, they won't necessarily see a message about voter ID when if they're registering to vote, that's kind of a key opportunity. And also, when they click through to the main government register to vote website, for some reason there isn't a voter ID message on that, which obviously is out of our control. But I'd have thought that seems like an oversight on their part. So there's that. I'd also wanted to check if the My Kirklees account is being used for the voter ID message at the moment. So let's start with those. Thank you.
On the first point, I think that does look like an oversight, and I'll get the page updated because it should, those two messages, register to vote and apply for voter ID certificate, should be together. Yes, we are going to be using the My Kirklees page. I'm not sure if it's live yet, but it's poised to be live. On the page, when people log in, we currently have a panel for a marketing campaign, and we have selected that to use. I don't know if it's being used at the moment. And we are looking, you raised at the last meeting how we used the My Kirklees generally. We are looking at that corporately. I know Terence and his team and I have been involved in how we use the websites, the accounts better. It's quite a big piece of work, but we are looking at that. So I will take away the first thing, and the second thing is a yes if it's not live yet.
Thank you. And you've kind of slightly preempted what I was going to ask about next, which was about wider use of the My Kirklees account. And what came up for me recently in my ward actually was a resident who had missed a new sort of traffic regulation order that was going to affect them. And there's an element of responsibility in terms of, they've overlooked street notices and things like that. But they made a point that they were living next to a new development. There'd been a lot of notices going up, like planning and things like that. And what they were looking for, I think, was a more digital, a more suitable digital channel and notifications about kind of the public notices that would affect them, rather than relying on the newspaper and street notices. So, like planning, licensing, traffic. I think I've been surprised that we don't have a single feed or subscription that people can sign up, like radius of their address even would be the most simple way of doing that. Is that what we're trying to get towards with the My Kirklees account? And would there be potentially an alternative for people who don't want to register an account but still subscribe to something?
I think that's kind of the holy grail of what we would like to achieve, that you could type in your postcode and everything that you could want to know in terms of planning applications, traffic orders, all that kind of thing. I can't say it's something that we're working on. At the moment, we tend to look at it on an issues basis. So how do we communicate planning applications, for example? Perhaps we do need to look more on a geographic basis rather than starting with the issue, because we end up with lots of different channels. I don't know how easy it would be for me to say, yes, we'll go away and look at that. But I think that would be a very effective way of people being able to log into their account and see everything that affects them. We will take that away as part of the website, all the different accounts that people can get with Kirklees, and look to see what kind of information we should have and on what geographic basis. I am happy to take that away.
Just before I bring you back in, Alec, I think perhaps it's one we should perhaps pick up with Rachel as part of a broader point about place-based approaches. So we're looking at place as being the way in which we engage with communities. So it's probably broader than just the actual messages, but I think you're absolutely right, Alec, and I'll let you.
Thank you, yeah. And hopefully, yeah, things do move in that direction. I suppose two final quick questions from me. Firstly, for the voter ID campaign, are we including colleges in that campaign? Because I'm thinking sort of younger voters who might be voting for the first time may be less likely to already have ID and may need a voter authority certificate. And then, in a second but unrelated question, can we change the Facebook page name to Kirklees Council? Because it's just Kirklees at the moment. As if people are looking for updates from the council, it's then clearer. And all our other channels, I think, are under Kirklees Council. Thank you.
On the voter ID, yes is the answer. The college and university have been specifically targeted. We've shared, one of the things that I like to do is share all the assets and allow other organisations to use them as they see fit. And we've done that with this campaign, particularly younger people and people in education are one of the target groups. So that's a firm yes. I don't know about the Facebook query. I don't know whether somebody else has Kirklees Council, perhaps. I will look into it. A lot of Facebook handles have been scooped up over the years, not always by well-wishers, I have to say. But I'll look into that. I don't know what the history is of that. I quite liked that we had just Kirklees for Facebook. It seemed simpler because there's nothing else called Kirklees really apart from the council. But I'll look into that and see what the reason is.
Tyler.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back on a point that Alex made, actually, and sort of develop it further, because you came at it from a planning point of view, but I think the traffic regulation orders that you mentioned as well, and communicating that on a wider basis is something we really should explore. It's because I remember when Mark and Graham were here from Highways doing a presentation, I don't know if it was at this Scrutiny or at the Economy and Neighbourhoods, but they were talking about the positive engagement they've had when they were doing their winter maintenance and gritting broadcasts on social media, and how they've had a positive reception on that. And I think traffic regulation orders, when we get them through, I try and put mine on social media, and they do get a good response. And okay, that's great for me as a councillor, but from a council perspective, it would be I think more useful for us to do it through the official channels, quote unquote. I think that would be something that will get, I think residents would appreciate seeing more coming from. So I appreciate you get a lot across the board, but nonetheless, they really do get the hits. So, and I regret asking my next question because it can make me sound so uncool, but there is TikTok out there as well in terms of platforms that you can engage with. But more specifically, short-form video content seems to be the way many social media platforms are going. I'm thinking particularly, not just TikTok, but Facebook and YouTube. That tends to be what they're leaning into as well, and getting our information out there in short-form video would also be a good avenue to explore as well. Thank you.
Yep, the data bears out your first point about traffic. Gritter Twitter has a very loyal and engaged following. Likewise, I meet my team every week and we talk about what posts or what things have generated engagement over there. An unscientific, observational thing, really. And it's nearly always something involved with traffic or a road closure or that kind of thing, or the weather. So there is an audience out there for those kind of things. We have put more of our resource onto highways over the last couple of years, understanding that. So we have somebody who liaises with Graham West's team and others, and that's their entire job, particularly during the winter months. But yes, I think one of the things I'll take away from this meeting is, certainly for traffic orders and such like, what's the process at the moment? If it is a piece of paper on a lamppost, that's probably not very 2023, is it, in engaging people? So yes, I'll certainly take that away. On the short form film, yes, that film is the way to engage at the moment on social media. It started off with text, and then you wouldn't get any engagement unless you put a picture with it, and now we've moved on to the film. But the risks increase as it gets more sophisticated, as the content gets more sophisticated. One of the things we're trying to do as a service is make sure everybody's trained up to use a phone to take a short professional video, because it's not necessarily as easy as it looks, and we don't necessarily have the resources to be able to edit and have a proper system, and it's not a very quick system either. So we are training up people to do that. I've been holding my team back on TikTok for now, because I want us to get it right, because I can't see why anyone would follow a council on TikTok at the moment. I can't think of a reason, and I don't want to pour content down a channel that nobody's interested in. So I've asked the team to go away and say, what kind of content would work here? We have used TikTok in the past, but as a proxy during the vaccine campaign, we used local social media influencers who were on that channel, and that worked really well. In a way that if we'd put a public health message on TikTok, I don't want to be negative about the team, but I just couldn't see that working. But we are, I have set the team up to look at how we could use TikTok and other channels that perhaps we haven't heard of yet that actually are, because TikTok will be either uncool or banned perhaps at some point. There'll be something else coming along. But we want to get it right. We want to have the team to have the resources to make content that works on the channel as well. So we will use it, but we want to be... We're doing the same with Instagram. Instagram we're using in a different way. We don't just have a message, we've put it on Facebook, put it on Twitter, put it on Instagram. We use Instagram as it's designed to be a visual platform, so it will always have a photo that makes Kirklees look stunning and that sort of thing. So it is used differently, and it's growing with a different audience as well. So I just want to get TikTok right before we go down there, but it definitely is a big channel.
Just before I bring you back in, Tyler, I'm going to bring Andy in, if that's all right.
Yeah, just briefly, Andy Simcox, Service Director for Strategy and Innovation. We've got Terence and Adrian here from IT for the technology item later. They might give us a different perspective or a complementary perspective in terms of use of things like TikTok. It's a question of balancing the enthusiasm across each of the services, I guess, sometimes.
Yeah, no, just a couple of comments really. I think when we're no longer teenagers, it should be our life's mission to make things that are cool uncool. So I would very much like us to go down that avenue eventually. But just the one thing I want to say, more of a general comment on, less on the highways now, but more on some of the big projects that we're doing, particularly the blueprint in Huddersfield and the ones that we're going to see in Dewsbury and across Kirklees, is that they're going to be, I think we're all, while we have different views and opinions on them, I think we're all under no illusion that that's going to be slow going, and that's going to be painful progress to get us to where we want to get to. And I think having that dialogue with the public is going to be so important, that when they're seeing Huddersfield being dug up, and it will be very easy and quick for people to rubbish sort of what's going on, but they do need to be informed that yes, this is happening now, but this is where we're going to get to, and this is how we're looking in terms of time frame of when we're going to get there. And just having that dialogue with people, I think, will reassure the residents of the inevitable backlash that we're going to get. That just happens whenever you have a big infrastructure project going on. So that's more comment than anything. Thank you.
And just to add to that, we recently dug up part of Huddersfield Town Centre, and instead of putting it back with the bricks, they put tarmac in, because obviously it's a temporary thing. But of course, because we didn't communicate that in advance, there was a lot of bad publicity the council got, because people thought that was a long-term permanent solution. So again, it's about thinking through, though, you know, in advance. Well, if we'd have said something, we're doing this, but it's a temporary thing, and this is why, it probably would have avoided. So I think that's where you're coming from, isn't it? Comment on any of that, or
I accept all those points, and that does happen. I think there are different phases with a big regeneration project like that. I think we have to be mindful that there is the vision bit at the start, but then there is the digging up the roads bit of it as well, which and they need different handling. They need dialogue rather than snazzy pictures, perhaps. And I accept, is it New Street, I assume it is, we could have done better with that, certainly. I know from experience, I travel on the Trans-Pennine Express, and I'm happy that it's being upgraded, but then I'm also upset when I can't get a train because it's being upgraded, kind of thing. And I appreciate that the communication of all those things is really important. So yes, point taken.
Thanks. I'll come in with a couple of observation comments, if I may. I'd like to take us back to the start, really, when we were talking about what our themes were for the strategic communication, and I like those themes. But I did feel in the growth section that there wasn't perhaps, and it's maybe just me reading the words on the page, but it didn't feel like there was enough emphasis on businesses and working with businesses and great. There was one comment about launch of Kirklees business or something, and that was it. Actually, there's a lot of stories we can tell about successful businesses, talk about apprenticeships and the opportunities that there are, and that broader education and skills. But it didn't, under just those theme headings, it didn't seem to come through to me. So I don't know whether that's just, it is there, but it's perhaps not as visible as perhaps it may be. I'll let you answer that one rather than give you loads of questions.
Your observation occurred to me when I was looking back at it, and we have done, and I know it's a different point that you're making. We have rebranded the business services that we do as a council, but that's slightly different from supporting businesses. We do have quite good channels with our businesses, but just in the same way that we can support voluntary and community groups in promoting services, I think we can do the same. We can do better with businesses. We at Christmas, for example, we made our Shop Local campaign where we used businesses, and they were fantastic, came forward, gave us great content, and were very enthusiastic. And perhaps we should take that spirit outside of the Christmas campaign and do more in support of local businesses. I'll take that away, certainly.
Thank you. My next comment is really about how we get messages out there, and I think I agree with colleagues on the panel that the voter ID is a really good example of a very successful campaign. Well, hopefully very successful campaign. We haven't finished it yet. One thing I think you've missed in terms of channels is we talked about some of the digital opportunities in communities. We've also talked a little bit about not everybody's digitally engaged, but in a lot of our communities there are area or village magazines or newspapers that we could put adverts in for free to communicate some of these messages, and I think we're missing a trick with that, because that's certainly to older residents as well as something that they will sit down and read. It doesn't cover the whole district, I fully accept that. Being very parochial, in my ward we have 3 in different villages that we could, have adverts in that will help get that message out, and it could be a Kirklees branch. You could literally lift and drop one of those voter ID adverts as an example, but there may be, and coming back to Tyler's point about more place-based communications, actually understanding what's out there could be critical to your thinking about for any localised campaigning that you need to do, knowing if there is an opportunity there. And I'm sure all councillors will have that knowledge and intelligence, but it's something about you guys reaching out and asking the councillors, what is there in your ward, who are the people that we need to be speaking to if we wanted to engage with that. So that's perhaps one to pick up and think about as well. And then I was just going to mention libraries. I mean, I don't tend to go to many meetings where I don't mention libraries, but I worry about our solution to communications is sending a load of leaflets to libraries. As a library volunteer, you kind of groan when you get the box from Kirklees, because there is that much that's sent to libraries to be displayed in libraries. We're in danger of drowning. And the other problem is, because everybody thinks the solution is send a pile of leaflets to libraries, it just gets lost. Because there's just so many, you go into most of our libraries, there are so many leaflets. If you did go in looking for something, you're unlikely to find it. So I would ask you that we perhaps are more strategic about the use of the library, rather than thinking it's a solution to absolutely everything we want to tell anybody. What could be done is work with our teams in the library service to actually, if people come in, they can signpost people online, because we've got computers in our library. So if we have people coming in that aren't digitally aware, they can help them. So let's make sure that our frontline library staff understand what communication we're doing to residents at any particular time. And again, you can take that down to place-based as well, if need be, for localised stuff. But let's not just think we're going to solve the problem by sending a wodge of leaflets to every library, because it doesn't work. And then, so that was more a comment, really, observation. But my point I'd like to talk about, and we haven't really picked up very much here, we talked at the beginning when you were talking about your strategy about public engagement. And I think you know where I'm going to go with this one. So I'd like to talk a little bit about public consultations, because this council seems to be obsessed with consulting the public. But then they go and consult the public, don't get very many responses, but we still think that's good. We tick the box and move on. And for me, there are 2 challenges I'd like to put to you. The first one is, again, I'll use the word strategic. Can we be more strategic about the number of times that we do consult the public? So that what the public doesn't want is every day the council going, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? It needs to be less frequent, so that when we do try and consult the public, they actually sit up and listen, and then they may respond. And secondly, there ought to be some threshold about response rates for something to be a valid consultation. Because I recall, and the number's stuck in my head, and I may have this number wrong, but I recall that when we did the consultation on Heckmond-Wike Town Centre investment, 147 people responded out the whole of Heckmond-Wike. And that was deemed to be a successful consultation. Well, I have no idea what percentage of the people in Heckmond-Wike that is, but it is tiny. And probably half those people work for the council or in some way involved within the political sphere, in political parties or something. We weren't reaching the public with that. And my worry is there are too many examples, and I've spoken in other scrutiny meetings about this, there are too many examples coming through where we have really small numbers. Even to our big pieces like the climate action plan, we had relatively small numbers that responded to that. But I think we're over consulting, and then we're just taking whatever we get, ticking the box and moving on, which kind of suggests it's more like a sham consultation than a real one. And half the people that do respond are interested parties, and therefore probably are very skewed in terms of those responses that we get. It's why I'm a huge advocate of place standards, because in place standards, you do the opposite. We go out and doorstep the public and talk to them. We don't wait for the public to come to us. And my other observation on this, and it's probably one for the Democracy Commission really, is that we have elected representatives. And we sometimes forget we have elected representatives. So us as councillors are elected to represent the people who elect us. But then you ignore us and go out and do a public consultation as well. So you could argue that we're superfluous, because if we're not being consulted and instead we're going to go out and consult the public every time, it's almost like running referendums all the time. Why have councillors as elected representatives if you're not letting them represent the people they're elected by? Sorry, quite a bit of a rambling rant, but if Marcus, you want to come back, I'm conscious Tyler would like to come in on this point as well.
Thank you for tipping me off that you would raise it. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that. In my opinion, is I would share many of those observations. I think for local authorities, not just Kirklees, the coordination of consultations and engagements and things like that do spread across quite a few different services. They're not always as strategic as we would want them to be. Some are statutory, some are members have asked for, and some are a good idea of themselves. And we do need to find a way of making that more coordinated and strategic. I think the concept of consultation fatigue is genuine, is a real thing. So we probably would overall want to do less. I couldn't point to any that I wouldn't do, but I certainly agree that we can get more value out of them. But I would make the point that place standard is effective. It doesn't necessarily make big numbers. It doesn't necessarily have an avalanche of responses, but the quality and the richness of that data is different. So I wouldn't necessarily define it purely by numbers, but I think the point about some of the consultations that have achieved low numbers, I think I would want to have done better on that. It's not necessarily something I can myself go away and deal with, but I will talk to the various colleagues who are involved in consultation and engagement and services directly who, for one reason or another, whether they have to or sometimes whether they don't have to, ask us to do consultations. Communications should perhaps put ourselves a bit further towards the front of the process where we're involved in, we can have some sort of oversight of what's going out, what's been out, what's in the pipeline, but that will take some coordination, and I will have to go away and talk to several other colleagues about how we can improve that. But I agree with the broad point, and we will look to go. I think Andy wants to.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring Andy in.
So as you know, you've picked up on a point that is of importance and interest to us as well. And Marcus is talking about the connections across multiple services. There are multiple council services that are currently involved in this, which is why you're absolutely right. We need to look at that activity and rationalise it so we get the greatest reach and the greatest impact from that work that is undertaken. Marcus is being tactful. It's broader than communications. There's data and insight. There's all the staff that are involved in the place activities as well. I would suggest it's probably worthwhile us coming back to you with that at a future meeting, if that would be helpful.
Well, I was when I came back in, was going to ask that perhaps if we could bring a paper back at some point, and we'll capture that as an action to look at how we better coordinate that. But I'll bring Tyler in and.
Max has broadly answered the point, but I do appreciate that a number of these consultations are statutory, legal and required. We had one the other week at Economy and Neighbourhoods, which was on the housing policy, and that had 19 responses to it. And had been put on Kirklees' website as sort of the portal for where you access it. Now, from a council's point of view, job done. The consultation's been done properly, and it's got the responses, not many, but it's got the responses, and they've done everything, we as a council have done everything we need to do on that. And I'm not expecting you're going to get hundreds of thousands of people commenting on a housing policy or many of the other policies that we go through. But as long as we can say when it gets to the end of the decision-making process that we've tried it, it's gone out for every public channel we get, okay, it hasn't got a great response rate, but we have done everything we can to get this out to the public. At the end of the day, I think that's what we should be driving towards there. And then, yeah, if we're at the end of doing all that, it still gets 19 responses, we've tried at least, haven't we? But that's sort of the approach I think we should be taking, broadly.
I disagree with you. I think if we are required to do a statutory consultation, and out of 400,000 people in Kirklees, we can only get 19 people to respond, we failed. And we should go back out again and try a different method. And part of this is about, if we don't set a threshold, everything's a success. We'll never learn. So if we only got 19 responses, something went wrong. So what we were communicating, the message we were communicating, clearly didn't engage people to actually respond to it. So there needs to be some reflection about, what was the visual that people saw if they did go on the website? What was the message that went out in terms of, I don't know, whether it was on My Kirklees or email, if it's on housing policy, who did we actually go out to? How do we make it visible and available? And there's learnings that can be taken from all of these. And just to go, well, we went out, we did it, we got 19 back, well, move on. I think that's where we need to push back and say, we absolutely need to learn from this. The messaging, the way we did it, the call to action, whatever it may be, whatever the language is, something didn't work. So, sorry, we're ending up on the conversation.
I'd say it would be useful. The point I was getting is that legally, I don't think there is a flaw for consultations, which, they must clear this threshold. Now, that would be very much worth something exploring and raising at some point. But, and this is something for, I think, another discussion. But I think that was the point I'm getting at. I don't think there is a flaw for that, rightly or wrongly. I don't think there is a flaw there. And maybe that's probably something we can...
We could set our own, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, consultation. I think members of the public these days can often feel like every 5 minutes they're being asked to give their feedback on something. You buy something and then you're asked to leave a review. How was you called us to, make a telephone banking payment or something. How was our service on this occasion? And it just feels like, if you respond to this, it's not really worth your time, and it's going to go into a black hole somewhere, then in the cosmic sense. But I think what I try and look out for, if I'm being asked to give, I suppose, my views on something, I want some sort of, or I'm being asked to do a survey, I want some sort of commitment there in terms of, am I going to be sent results of this? Am I going to be able to see how everyone's collective feedback has, shaped whatever it is you're being consulted on? So if we're asking people to, take 5 minutes or 10 minutes to complete something like this, it would be great if, we can say right there and then, everyone who gives us feedback will be updated with the results of the consultation and sort of a you said we did. And then that just makes people think, oh, actually, there is going to be some follow-up in return if I take my time out to do this. And if we close that feedback loop in consultations as much as possible, then that'll just encourage more participation. Thank you.
I think that it's very good practice to do that. I don't know whether we do that again. This is probably how we can link back when we come back. The data shows that even if people don't get the result that they were hoping for, that if you come back and say this was the result and it was against what people actually ask for, they still have high levels of satisfaction that at least their views were considered from other studies that I've seen. But yeah, that is good practice, and we'll try and build that in.
I'm just going to bring Councillor Smage in.
Thank you. I can't manage to observe. I love them. I can't manage to observe. I just wanted to pick up this about, I think it was the affordable housing, wasn't it? And therefore it was more technical because it was numbers as to how many affordable houses in a development that went to economy and neighbourhoods, and probably developers are more interested in that sort of consultation. But on the other side of that, we talked at Regen panel about particular consultations on different master plans, and it wasn't Dewsbury and Huddersfield, it was the smaller centres master plans. And lots of people had looked at the proposals, but very few people had answered the questionnaire. So you'd got lots of engagement with clicking on and looking at what was proposed, but nobody really answering any questions. And we talked there about maybe having something where if you've got something like that there's like a yes or no. Are you in favour of this, yes or no? Because there's a difference between looking at something and filling in lots of questions. And it was really stark, the numbers were really stark between the two. And therefore, it is how do we engage with people so that we actually get information back, I think, and how we can use that information. I think that is a key challenge, actually. Yeah.
On that, oh, sorry. I'll just pick up Councillor Smage's point. I'll take credit for the first bit of that lots of people clicked on, and I will defer to... there's a serious point. My data and insight colleagues, there's a science to getting people to then undertake, well, it depends on what your questions are, who they're aimed at, and it's a process that they're more skilled than I am at, but I'm sure we can pick that up with them. Sometimes people... And I don't agree with this, but sometimes a methodology of looking at the feedback that you've had from something, if people look at what you're presenting and then don't then make a comment, it is apparently an indication of satisfaction. Now, I wouldn't necessarily stake my reputation on that, but it would be good to find a way of channeling people towards actually participating, but there's a science to it.
Paul?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think really interesting discussion, isn't it? And I think, certainly it's a discussion that's going to go on and needs to go on. I think a number of things I'd agree with some of the comments about consultations, surveys. We all, I say we, I mean collectively outside of the council, we just seem to be obsessed with surveys. As politicians, I certainly get asked to run surveys and have to remind people that my particular ward have been surveyed and consulted to death and try and resist that temptation. But there is that in the general sense. I think the fact is as well with consultations and in particular, people respond when they're interested in something and when it really impacts them. And we had a classic example of this, I think, in Home Valley South a number of years ago when a road scheme was proposed, and we had a huge response to that. There was something like 2,500 actual responses. I can't remember, 6,000 or 8,000 more in terms of people pinging and coming on and accessing information, hundreds of people attending, actual face-to-face consultations. And in fact, in many respects, a much higher rate of response than some other high-profile consultations. In particular, do we need a mayor in West Yorkshire? So that was very pertinent to those individuals. But I take the point that's been made about, and I think John's raised this. The reason that was picked up as well, there were a whole range of different avenues that people have picked that up through discussions on the door, through social media, through various groups, etc. So there was that sort of genuine engagement. But interestingly, and this is always the way, isn't it? when we talked about thresholds, although that was a tremendous response, it really was, in terms of that kind of road scheme, one of the most significant responses that people had ever seen. There was still, on a local political perspective, a view that it wasn't everyone, therefore the result didn't count. So where do you put that threshold? Is it 95%? Is it 99%? Is it 50%? Is it 40%? And I'm not sure the thresholds would resolve the perception that people have about whether a result is a good result or not. But it's not to say we shouldn't discuss it. I think it's an absolutely bona fide discussion. But, you know, do we start, as another example, saying that local elections don't count because it's only 30% of people vote and so forth and so on? It's a problem we face all the time, isn't it? I think, so I do think it's worth us looking at it. But I think setting arbitrary thresholds is a really difficult one, and it's difficult to understand how we would do that. But I absolutely agree that what we need to be doing is focusing on how do we engage people and make people interested in a particular issue, not over-survey them, not over-consult them. Some of the statutory stuff, obviously, we have to do it anyway. So I think the broad elements of the discussion are definitely worth carrying on with, and it goes across a whole range of areas. And I certainly agree that local councils have an absolute key role to play in that discussion with people, whether it's through ward surgeries, knocking doors, or simply casework that they deal with. So, yep, I think really good discussion.
Thank you. Any more questions from the panel? Just to summarise, I thought that was a very good rounded discussion, and thank you to Marcus and Andy for that. We picked up a number of things. Thanks to Councillor Lukic, who spotted that we hadn't got the voter ID in the right place on the Kirklees website. Good discussion around how do we ensure people know about things that impact them locally, using the example of TROs, and is there a way we can move towards a place-based communications? Linking with that, my little point about village magazines and newspapers and how we can utilise those for getting some of these key messages out. But again, not something you'd use too frequently, otherwise it becomes wallpaper, doesn't it? A question about whether the Facebook page could perhaps be renamed, but we'll just look at that. Quite a broad discussion around public consultations, and I think, Andy, thank you very much for agreeing to perhaps come back on that. And let's have a look at how maybe we can get better at that and avoid this consultation fatigue. And then finally, probably links to our next agenda item as well, a bit of a discussion around, better use of video-based content and perhaps videos-based channels for those comms, which I think is a nice segue link into our next session. But I'd just like to thank you for attending and thank members for their questions. Thank you. I'll close that item, and we're now moving on to item 8, which is our technology update. I think we have Terence who's going to lead on that one. Care to introduce yourself first?
Hi, my name is Terence Hudson, and I'm Head of Technology here at the Council, and I would like to apologise for the late arrival of the documents. That was my fault, and an administrative error on my part. I'm going to go to the next slide. Just a bit of a whistle-stop tour. The blue bits are our strategy headlines. This is just a recap of the things that we've achieved in the last 12 months. On getting the basics right, it's very much around a push towards enabling people, like staff, councillors, to be more resilient and make best use of the equipment that we provide. A for example of that is we've just launched self-service password resets. So that is a big part of getting the basics right. The last point, is around the digital post room. So we've actually started handling a lot of the paper that we handle through the council digitally instead of moving it around in vans, thus improving our green footprint. The next heading is around our infrastructure. It's very much around building resilience. We've done some work to go to procurement for our new network. We've got more capacity on our network, and we're yet to complete the building work in Dewsbury to link up Dewsbury and Huddersfield, but the work's in progress, and that's using network rails infrastructure. And certainly, that, you know, for us, that is a big deal. The next section around commission applications, the big thing, other than we actually have delivered some new things like new contact centre platform, new legal system, is around, we've assessed the application landscape in the council. We spend a lot of money on applications across the council, and we need to ensure that we prioritise what we do next. And certainly when we did that piece of work, consulted with all directorates and got to exec team, asset management was the next big thing, because obviously depreciating assets, buildings, roads, etc. Is something you need to closely manage. I will briefly mention on the next section around using data intelligently and securely, that we have got some new controls in there, which we'll move into on the private session, around cyber security. We've also got new backup systems as well. In terms of technology and skills, we did undertake some consultation. We had 1,800 people respond to that consultation, because we did target it, especially when it got to the point where we ran out of people prepared to do it online, so we did it face-to-face. So it did actually push into communities around that area, and that's kind of helping us shape so what we do next in terms of digital inclusion. We've delivered the new equipment in the council chambers, so you'll see the cameras on the wall. We've got a new system upstairs on the balcony, and again, that's about just making these meetings more efficient, and hopefully, touch wood, dare I tempt fate, we might even have electronic voting by Wednesday. And my boss is shaking his head going, oh, don't mention it, well, I have done. We've done it now. In terms of the next point, you know, we are working with Microsoft around some of our pathways for staff training, and obviously that's for councillors as well. The next section is around connecting people, business. There's been a big push around business here, so this is where we've been working with the Kirklees Care Association to get NHS funding into the private sector. That's going well, and that was on the back of a survey that we did in that sector as well, where we got about 60% response rate from the private sector, because it was in their interests, obviously, to do that. 80% of Kirklees residents now have access to full fibre or equivalent services, which is fantastic coup for us, because I would say we're bucking the national trend, and you know, if you look back, that's about the investment that we've made ourselves quite a lot over the last even 25 years, because it is 25 years since we first put fibre into Kirklees as a council. The next one is around personalised care and environmental sensors. It is growth area, people call it IoT. It's very much a case of a case-by-case basis, putting that kind of technology in. And the next one is around the class leading. There was some comments on the previous section around web content. We are assessing our web content. It is too diverse. There's been multiple mentions already this morning about the My Kirklees account. Yes, we want to push people into those spaces, but there are some more national initiatives. So as a for example, I did get a message during the meeting, because I've got one of my staff watching. The bit around the highways, that is a national initiative now, so the TROs and all that kind of stuff is done at a national level, because obviously, you know, you cross boundaries into other parts of West Yorkshire, even into Greater Manchester and so on. In terms of kind of deliveries, we've delivered a new job site, and we're also currently promoting online billing and hopefully pushing more people to just using the My Kirklees account to get their council tax bills. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of targets, again, it's a whistle-stop tour. Very much just keep doing what we're doing on getting the basics right, and it is about resilience, because ultimately we just don't want you ringing our service desk. It's not that we don't like you, it's just that, you know, if we're doing our job well, that's as simple measure as it gets. In terms of the infrastructure, we will be delivering a new core network upgrade, and we will actually start capitalising on that link between Dewsbury and Huddersfield, and hopefully further. So, you know, it might be simply able to get out into places like Marsden and Slough and things like that. In terms of the applications, We do want to finally deliver the new housing and social care systems. We do want to make sure that we've got that single prioritised view of what systems we need, and we want to make sure that we deliver the benefits, because what's really important is that we get a return on investment for all the money that we spend. In terms of data and security, again, I'll touch more on this on the second part of the meeting, but it's very much around building cyber skills and managing that threat. Hopefully this year as well that we'll deliver the Yorkshire and Humber Care Record. Going on to the right-hand side of the page, we have, in terms of the technology and skills, it is about delivering actual outcomes for inclusion, and it is around actually delivering more in terms of the getting the benefits out of the software that we rent from Microsoft. I'll use the word rent, not buy. In terms of the business, there's very much around the NHS and outcomes from for the Department of Health and Social Security. We will be supporting WICA and the DCMS on Project Gigabit, which is focused around the Denby Dale area, because that's probably where a good chunk of your 20% is. And then we've got we're supporting Yorkshire Water on the deployment of smart meters into Kirklees as well. In terms of next steps on the internet services, it's very much about simplifying those services. So, there's quite a lot of comment this morning around the complexity of it. We've got to make sure that we can drive people to where they need to be in the most efficient way possible, and it's easy to find things online. And certainly the last bit is around, we do need to push on reducing paper. It's a massive overhead to any organisation. It's particularly a massive overhead to ours. And really, it's the mail part of it. Printing, it's enough itself, but then when you stick it in an envelope and it's costing you a lot of money to move it around the system, it's not great. Next slide. So I was asked to do this by the chair. So this is just a bit of a commentary on the economic challenge. I would say the biggest issue that's hit us is the strength of the dollar, because if you wind back the clock, before COVID, you could, if you've ever been on holiday to the United States of America, you always just go, wow, how cheap is it in the US of A? Well, it wasn't really. It was just that it was about the dollar exchange rate, and that's plummeted. It's absolutely plummeted. We lost 20% of value again just in the in-year last year, and that has a knock-on effect to contracts, especially cloud-based contracts. In terms of supply chains, getting equipment and all that kind of stuff, it's very much dominated by China, unfortunately. So, these cameras in this room, 16-week lead time in the end. We were hoping they'd be a commodity that you'd be able to get quite quickly. In terms of the laptops that are on our desks, just wind that back the clock, just 3 years before COVID, and they were 500 quid a pop. They're now 720 quid a pop. They're not cheap. And it's one of those things where we can't really cut corners, because going back to the strategy, I'm not going to get the basics right if I just start buying really cheap kit and it doesn't effectively help you do your jobs. So in the only other kind of headlines is, you're seeing big increases. So we've probably all got a letter on our doorstep at home already from your broadband provider. 13.8% plus, another 3.9% was mine. We're seeing exactly the same kind of price rises in what we do. And the only other part of it is a risk is around failure, company failure. UK Cloud is a for example where you had a massive traditionally a massive company just fail, and the official receiver gets brought in because there's no assets left. So what are we doing about that? Partly is about attracting additional investment, so the NHS in particular around the care sector. That will continue, and it needs to continue because we need to deliver on what the Department of Health needs. In terms of grant funding, we've attracted £350,000 on cyber resilience, and as I noted, going into detail of that in the private session. And then we've reprofiled the capital budget for the next 5 years. In terms of people, it is about getting that right balance. I'd put it in layman's terms, you need right tools to do your job. It's as simple as that, and then you need the skills to use those tools. And that is a big focus. We called it getting the basics right. We're going to keep getting the basics right. In terms of the last 2 points, we have attracted some funding to train staff, and we want to develop our pathways to bring new talent into the organisation. Typically, it's going to be young people, it's going to be apprentices, it's going to be university students, because you know, we're in a similar position to other sectors in the public sector where it is a struggle to attract experienced staff, because those experienced staff will be wanting to work in the private sector. And then the other option, obviously, is just commission services instead of doing them in-house. That's me done.
Thanks, Terence. I'll open it up now to questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Terence. A few questions about how we, I suppose, help the public with technology. We want to push public, I won't say push, we want to provide good facilities that the public can use. You know, much of the public prefers to use digital channels nowadays if they want to contact the council to report a problem of some kind. And I was just wanting to get a better sense of the ways we help the public to do that. So, for example, if a member of the public's out and about, they see something wrong, pothole, or some broken street light, or something not roads related, problem in a park, something like that. Is it possible to streamline some of these processes a bit more? I know Kirklees had an app going on a while ago. I don't think it's in use anymore. So I want to ask a bit about the app. Is there any plans for an app, or do we prefer people to use the website as the channel? And can the website can we look to improve the website to use more of the features on a smartphone, instead of have to enter location of something, can we have a button that's using the current location, using the location services on the phone, and another button that says, oh, take a photo, to show what the problem is, just to help streamline that so users aren't having to take longer than they need to report a problem. That's my first one. Thank you.
That's very much what we want to do, quite simply. We were hoping to launch a new app, because obviously an app on a phone, you've got all those permissions inbuilt, rather than if it's on a website, you end up having to ask lots of questions. So that was something we've been looking at, and it is something that we still are looking into, because obviously we want to make sure that the experience around My Kirklees is the experience, and we want to make sure that that's the best experience it can be. And it's certainly something that we're looking forward to developing more of.
Something else that occurred to me on how we use technology is ways we can maybe keep councillors informed about issues in the wards. For example, if people are reporting problems, then unless a councillor specifically asks about that problem separately, they're not necessarily going to be proactively informed unless an officer picks something up and thinks this is something to inform about. But all the different reports that we've got coming in, going into sort of case management systems, is there any way that potentially councillors, obviously, could be given access to, anonymised reports, so they can sort of identify emerging issues that might be getting reported or that multiple people are reporting, and then take action to follow up as a councillor?
I'm just going to jump in and build on maybe a heat map, so you could see in the ward where things have been reported, and you can click on them and maybe see a little bit about it. It's probably the way to do it.
Previously, we did do a development around a councillor account that got shelved, and it's certainly something that we have been talking about in terms of, so what would be a good experience. I think the heat map is a very good example. In terms of, the conversation that's gone on earlier as well, it's around where are those issues that affect me as a resident, but also it's how do we then push that information to councillors, and I'm certainly more than happy to take that way as something that we should be looking into developing next year.
Thank you. And in terms of overall resources and so on, I know you've mentioned a lot about increasing costs and things. I was just wanting to know a bit about kind of how often, how efficient you say we're running the IT at the moment, based on, we'll be running things in-house, we're running things cloud and through third parties. I'm assuming, especially at the moment, there's quite regular reviews of how much things are costing, whether there's opportunities to rationalise in systems and so on. Wondering if that could be expanded on a bit. Thank you.
In terms of the systems, it's very much around, we've taken stock of where we're at, and we're looking at, where can we rationalise. The reality is that it's quite often is the industry, it's in their interests to keep products niche because they want to stay in business, and we see a lot of that. In terms of what we have today, we do have quite a lot of legacy applications that are on our network. They are relatively cheap to run, quite frankly, and then when you start switching to cloud-based solutions, you go from what is a capital-rich model to a very low revenue model to something that can be significantly higher on revenue, and that's a risk for us, and we are tracking that in quite closely. Sometimes we get benefits. So with our new procurement of, for example, of our adult social care system, the run cost of that is less, and we're certainly targeting those big ticket items. And so going back to the point around assets, it's not just the running of the app, because in the grand scheme of things, if you get your asset management right, and you've got the information and data to support much better decisions, then in all likelihood spending a few extra quid on the best app will make sure that you can make better decisions that will have more cumulative knock-on effects further down the line. But certainly in terms of the market, we're very much regularly reviewing where the market's at, and at the moment it is quite volatile, and we've seen companies fail, like I've said, and it's about striking the right balance in terms of our revenue commitment, but then looking at how do we maximise return on investment on capital, because that's a really, really key point that we put across to the exec team.
Thank you. Sorry, one more. And when we're talking about improving the systems and so on, and how much do we have to rely on kind of external resource to help with these things? Do we have the bandwidth, the capacity, the capability in-house to make these developments in the main? Or how much do we have to go external? Thank you.
Currently, there's, you buy a new system, we implement the new system, and everything that the ecosystem around it, in terms of making sure that it interfaces into our core finance systems and everything else that we do, we largely do in-house. We're not particularly reliant on external resources for that, but when we do need external resources, we make conscious decisions to contract them in, and then make sure that we learn from what goes on, so then the sustainable part of that piece of work just becomes business as usual within the IT service. Thank you.
Just before I bring you in, Tyler, I think Andy wants to come.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just further to Terence's answer to one of your questions, Councillor Lukic. So obviously the council has a challenge in financial context. Every service, including the IT service, has to look at how it works within its budget envelope. And one of the reasons for the slide that describes the economic context is quite clearly that describes the pressures that relate to that particular area of spend. So like all other parts of the organisation, the service is looking at what its priorities are and how it works within that, and supporting the advice for the rest of the organisation and the administration about what is possible within that, and whether we need to adjust any of our in-year plans or plans within the lifetime of the existing technology strategy. I think it's a fact that we all face, isn't it? And they are doing that.
Tyler?
Thanks, Chair. Just a question actually on the back of that, because this week we've got budget and we're going to be talking about efficiencies will come up at some point, and I understand that there's been an effort to have more council employees working from home, and that'll mean, you know, existing areas more hot desking, I imagine, and I know that the council's phone system is basically now all run off Teams pretty much, as far as I understand. Has that transition to a more flexible working arrangements, has all that work already happened during COVID and now it's just following through on that, or is there still more investment that's going to be made to support flexible working?
COVID was a challenge, but it was actually an easy challenge compared to post-COVID, actually, because moving almost all of your workforce from here to home was, you know, I'm sure Adrian lost a lot of sleep over that period of time. But at the end of the day, because you were all at home, we could manage that kind of bubble of where you all lived and worked. Now, when we went more back into the hybrid scenario, then that brought new pressures, because obviously we've mentioned video multiple times this morning, which is just second nature for us to be in front of a video camera. It's actually that creates such a huge amount of pressure on our networks and systems. But thankfully we've managed to get that balance right, make sure we can keep doing that, and so on and so forth. We've got additional investment into spaces like this, so this was all made hybrid during COVID. We're going to keep developing it as well over the next 12 to 24 months. Certainly when you look at a building like Civic Centre 1, there'll be new technology put in there as well to really kind of maximise that opportunity to keep hybrid working. That's probably the way I'd describe it.
Just a couple from me, Terence. First one is a bit parochial, so I apologise to members of the committee, but Project Gigabyte, my ears picked up when you mentioned Denby Dale, because obviously it's the neighbouring ward to me, so it's probably no interest to these guys. But can you just tell me a little bit more about what's involved or what that is, or maybe share stuff with me later if you want, just quickly on.
Right, I'm trying to think just to make sure, because I don't want to breach any commercial confidentiality and the relationship.
Should we deal with it outside of this meeting then?
Well, I can say, well, I'll do it in two parts. So historically, Denby Dale, for whatever reason, it's never attracted investment. It just hasn't attracted investment from the major network providers, whether it's Openreach, CityFibre or whomever. I don't know what it is other than geography in my mind, but obviously in neighbouring wards, because because of possibly the geography of the location, things get done. So as a for example, you look in your own ward, once a commercial decision is made to triangulate that ward with other places like Murfield, as a for example, then you open up the art of the possible. But within that area in Denby Dale, it is part of where DCMS are going to invest. So we're just working through that process and seeing where that'll take us, and obviously we're supporting that process locally.
Then a couple of other points, if I may. We talked a little bit about the amount of work that's done in-house as against commissioned or consulted, and I'm entirely comfortable with that. But the risk it brings with it is that loss of organisational memory and dependence on individuals' knowledge, particularly in an environment where it's difficult to recruit, which means you're always at risk of people being poached. How are we managing that risk, really?
In terms of managing the risk, on an operational day-to-day basis, we do make sure that we have more than one individual. We talk about SPOFs, both machines and people, single points of failure. We need to make sure that we don't end up with single points of failure, and we're doing what we can. For the medium-term point of view, I would probably say it's not a significant risk because of the profile of the workforce that we've got, but certainly that's where we want to work with Huddersfield University more as a for example about bringing in new talent and bringing in pathways to manage that and then maintain the skill and experience in the service. But obviously, you know, like I say, whenever we do commission work, we do also want to make sure that we maintain those skills in-house, but then also if you think of something like you might commission a cyber security service as a for example, you might look at, so what's the profile that you need inside your business? Because you might say, well, that's always going to be commissioned, but you might need new skills. So as a for example, could use investigatory skills to actually use the data that you get rather than say, well, I need to maintain that system. You move your business focus into where you need to be strong for the next period of time rather than just say, well, I need to be strong in everything, because it's not really economically viable.
Thank you. If I just ask a couple of other questions, I'll ask a couple and then maybe pick them up together. The first one, you talked about the using the rail assets to link infrastructure between Huddersfield and Dewsbury. Can you just expand a little bit on that? Because I wasn't aware there was a problem between, were they operating as two independent networks in effect?
No. What we have is we have a network contract where we pay reasonably significant sums of money to triangulate Dewsbury, Batley and Huddersfield at a kind of under the ground network level. Sometimes that isn't as resilient as you might think. So as a for example, many years ago, I think it was Northern Electric dug a trench in Fartown, and that took the whole network out. So it's all of Batley and all of Dewsbury. So with the best will in the world, you think you've got a triangle, but you haven't, because it all joins in one place. So what we're looking at with working with Network Rail is that we can put a backbone, a really high speed backbone through Kirklees. There's capabilities there to literally deliver data at the speed of light. And I know it's a bit corny, but you know, there's no limit on how fast you can keep those places connected. So everything's connected today, but ultimately we know where pinch points are on our network. But what we want to do is just open up that capability. And also, you know, when you think about it, from a almost economic point of view, you've also then potentially be bringing the private sector to invest in those places, because you're literally one of the, well, I believe Kirklees is one of the best connected places in the country, because we are equidistant almost between the Internet Exchange in Leeds and the Internet Exchange in Manchester, and now we've got the capability to light that up from one end to the other and build on the resilience.
Thanks, Alex. I always thought the cables that ran between Leeds and Manchester went through here and up through over the tops, but
the old ones do.
All right.
But the new ones come through the Network Rail.
And then the other one I was going to ask about, and I think Councillor Lukic sort of inferred it, and it's about the transformation programmes, and particularly within the highways and street scene service. Because as you quite rightly said, that's probably one that most members of the public use probably most frequently in terms of wanting to report things. They would report the street light on their street out or a pothole or whatever. And the systems currently aren't particularly brilliant. And you know, I don't know about other colleagues, but I've certainly had numbers of examples of reports that have kind of gone into a black hole and disappeared because there are multiple systems that are being used to manage getting the request from the initiation by a member of the public through a variety of people to the actual person that's actually going to go out and fix that street light or fill in that pothole. So where are we in terms of priorities, in terms of that transformation service in highways? So we've got a straight through, so we're not losing stuff and we're not reliant on individuals remembering to copy it from this system into that system, et cetera, et cetera.
I think one of the key building blocks will be when we acquire a new asset management system. So it goes back to the point around assets, because once we get the new asset management system, you'll be able to build out from that. We do have existing processes and they're very good digital processes in terms of, as for example, on street lighting, because if you go onto the website or the My Kirklees account, you should be able to see the street lamp, you should be able to click on the lamp, you should be able to report a fault, and certainly if that fault gets dealt with, you'll get a report back through the My Kirklees account in particular. You know, you'll be able to go back in and see the status of that job. So at the moment, it's work in progress, but I think for me it's the work we need to do in terms of transformation and improving that end-to-end people process as well as the technology process, and make sure that whatever system investment we make is that's significantly more beneficial to residents, but also from a data point of view, you will also be able to surface more intelligence online to councillors around what's going on at a street level.
Thanks, Terence. And my final question is a bit of a stupid one, if the others weren't stupid. I don't know what we mean by environmental sensors. So there's a couple of mentions of environmental sensors, and I'm not sure exactly what that means. So I'm just tell me what it is, and I may have a question possibly.
Yeah, so there are different types of new technology out there in terms of getting things into the wider public domain, sensors into the public domain. But all of them are based on low power. So you need to be able to put a sensor that's going to measure something, but have a battery in it, because it will be in the wild rather than, you know, think of your smart meter. So your smart meter is connected into your main service, so it uses electricity, so it's a high-powered sensor. But if you go to a low-powered sensor, so as a for example, I think it's within the Slathwaite area, we've got a little pilot around flood sensors. So there's things called trash screens, and if the trash builds up at a trash screen, and then the gully can then flood, you can just put a sensor on that, and you could either sense the rate that water's going through, you could sense whether light's shining through that screen and so on, and then every hour of the day it just pings a message back to us to say it's looking good. You've got other kinds of sensors around, and you think around major infrastructure developments, around roads, where you can look at air quality, and all the time you can keep sending data back to say the air quality is at this level. Because then once you start building up the data from all of these sensors, you can then either start look at your operational services, such as clearing the trash screen as a for example, or you might even at an intelligent level say, well, I'm going to change the traffic light sequence to help remove a build-up of traffic. It's that kind of stuff. So there's lots of capability there, and certainly that's a rapidly growing market. It will be interesting to see where it grows into, because I know Amazon are keen, but it's one of those things where if Amazon are keen and make a success of it, it'll be a success. If they're not, they'll just shelve it. But there is opportunity there now that we've not had before. And you know, the prime example where we're working now with Yorkshire Water is they don't want to be paying people to drive around and read your water meters. So they want the water meter to respond back. But again, because they're all underground, typically, then it's about putting a sensor in there that's going to sit there for 5 years, sending little messages back to Yorkshire Water.
Thanks, Andy. I was confused because it's mentioned in the context of personal care and environmental sensors.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I didn't understand. It didn't make sense to me. So are we using them in relation to the provision of personal care for people in, you know, that are vulnerable in homes or something?
Yes. So in terms of inside the building where you've got a power source, we are putting different types of sensors. So, you know, falls prevention is a big thing for the NHS, because obviously they don't want people being admitted to hospital, then you don't want to go through the discharge process and so on and so forth. So one end of the scale where we're investing cash into our own care homes around falls prevention technology, but then you get down to wearables. So as a for example, I've seen an example of wearables where you know, when you wet the bed, as a for example, you know, that can become a long-term health issue. But if you can intervene with it earlier, because you know it's happened, then it's discreet and it's done using, you know, something that's no bigger than a 50p piece in terms of a wearable, and then you can start improving, you know, people's lives in real terms by deploying that kind of technology. So it's all of that stuff. So the environmental stuff is the outdoor stuff, the indoor stuff we're also looking into. And certainly when it comes for investment from the NHS, you know, the indoor stuff, it'll be interesting to see where it goes, because again, the private sector did try to enter that market at a personal care level, but that didn't happen. I don't know whether it's because of COVID or it just happens to coincide with that. But certainly in terms of, you know, supporting people to live longer at home, sensors and all that other stuff could be a real benefit.
Thanks, Andy. I can see the logic in it. I just worry a little bit about elderly people that are alone. And if instead of sending carers in, we're now going to have sensors to monitor them, they'll be even more lonely, won't they? A bit of a worry, really. But thank you very much.
Can I just come in on that? I think because we use a lot of assisted technology at the moment, don't we? So do I take it is a progression in that assisted technology, is this? Because there is a lot of work around falls prevention, isn't there? And things about, like, if somebody forgets to turn the tap off or the gas off or something like this, there are things that can be done to help so that somebody doesn't have a flood or somebody the gas gets turned off for things like this. So do I presume that these new sensors are a progression to what we've been doing for quite a while?
Yes.
Do I have any more questions for Terence? Or it looks like we've completed that session. I think that was quite a useful discussion. I think we're going to end the meeting now and move into private sessions so we can have a further discussion. But if we can just pause for a few minutes whilst we switch off the recording. Thank you.